Trade Policies Review Division. And the objective of these short presentations is to give the Secretariat an opportunity to present something on the data requirements under the WTO's transparency mechanism for regional trade agreements, which based on which we are required to write factual presentations to be presented to for committee work in the WTO. So the objective here is really to show you the kind of data that we request, the kinds of complications that may arise if we receive incorrect data, and also it gives you an opportunity to exchange with us on what some of your concerns might be. We're also obviously very interested in hearing what some of your constraints are and in any way in which we can help you. We also have this afternoon the chief of the IDB section, the integrated database section, which also collects data on tariffs and trade in the WTO. And the reason for the invitation is really so that we can present both sides or both sets of data collection, because we use each other's data very often. So, for instance, if once we receive a notification of an RTA, we usually check with the IDB to see if the data has already been provided by the parties to that RTA, in which case we do not request it. And also any data that you provide to us is then exchanged with the IDB. So with that, I will leave it in the capable hands of Pamela, Rowena, and Adelina, so that they can walk you through the data requirements under the transparency mechanism and the IDB. Thank you, and I hope you have a nice afternoon or evening or morning, wherever you are.
Thanks so much, Rohini. So now let me just share my screen. This one. So today we will be having 3 sessions, starting with myself. My name is Pamela Bayona, and I'm going to give an overview of RTA data processes and data formats. Following this will be my colleague Rowena Cabos. She will give a discussion on the common challenges to RTA data submissions and how we can more easily overcome them. And then our special session is with Ms. Adelina Mendoza, who is Chief of the IDB unit, and she will give a discussion on the lessening the notification burden for the IDB, a comprehensive IDB notification. And following that, we will have an interactive dialogue if you have any questions or concerns regarding the topics discussed. So again, Rohini has already touched on this, but we just wanted to reiterate that the purpose of this session is really to highlight that before the data is presented in a very clean and very complete format, a lot of processes are involved in all of this. And the important thing that if it's possible is really to get it right at the start during data submissions, when we can already have the very good data quality, so that we don't have to keep coming back to members and having dialogues, long email conversations with statisticians in Capital to discuss about the correct information that needs to be submitted for members' data requirements to the WTO. And so through this dialogue, we hope to improve the quality of RTA data submissions and hopefully lessen the time and work burden for members' technical experts. So just a more detailed overview of the topics discussed today, I will go through the transparency mechanism mandate of the RTA section, and then I will give an overview of the ideal data submission formats, including for goods, services, FDI, and movement of natural persons, which is the type of data that we request from members, and go through a new tool that we have prepared. It's called the RTA Data Submissions Cheat Sheet, which consolidates all of this in an easy to understand format that we are preparing now for members when we request the data. And then later we will give illustrative examples of the challenges that we face when dealing with the specific issues for country submissions for RTAs. And we will also talk a little bit about the tools that we have prepared, including a new technical note, so that we can prevent having to deal with all of these challenges. So let me start with the transparency mechanism, which is a decision of the WTO General Council in 2006 for regional trade agreements, which essentially increases the transparency for RTAs and clarifies and strengthens the notification obligation of WTO members for their RTA agreements to the WTO. So what does it involve in practical terms? Basically, once parties have signed an agreement and ratified it in the domestic processes, they are obliged within 1 year after ratification to notify the full text and data files of their agreement to the WTO Secretariat. And this includes everything, including annexes, protocols, preferential tariff schedules, and any accompanying methodology notes related to the agreement. And all of this must be submitted within 10 weeks after ratification, or 20 weeks for developing countries. So all of this information is gathered by the Secretariat and then moved forward to the WTO consideration process, wherein we now prepare a so-called factual presentation, which is presented to members at the Committee for RTAs or the Committee for Trade and Development. And this report is then circulated around for comments and verification, and then adopted as a published document for all the members of the WTO. So what does this data process include? We start with data submission, which comes in the form of an RTA data request sent out to members, usually via email. And it includes the data needed for the specific RTA, which, depending on the type of agreement, will include data on tariffs, imports, services, and foreign direct investment, and movement of natural persons. So this can be taken from different sources. Ideally, it should be submitted officially from the parties in response to the data request. However, if there is no data available, then the Secretariat sources it from secondary sources, such as the WTO Integrated Database, the UNCTAD Statistics Database for FDI, various national statistical offices for each country, and if available, regional databases such as for ASEAN or I think African Development Bank or several other regional organizations which also collect the data. So, however, if the data has not been submitted and it is retrieved from other secondary sources, it then sometimes creates discrepancies with national data figures which may be available internally, and then it leads to some questions or discrepancies when we present the report to the Committee for RTAs. Hence, we really encourage that the countries submit the data officially when it is requested for each specific RTA. So when the data is then consolidated, the Secretariat then checks if it is in the correct format to be able to be processed for the factual presentation. And if it's not, then we do pre-processing such as having to ensure that all of the lines from all of the HS chapters from 1 to 97 are completely included, and then that ensuring that the HS codes are all in the same HS nomenclature, to be able to bring the data to a standardized form. Once the data file is then consolidated, it is transformed into the charts and tables in our factual presentation reports. And this is circulated around to the members for them to verify prior to the presentation to the CRTA or CTD. And then following these presentations at the committee meetings, these files are then finalized into Excel database files, which we upload into the WTO RTA databases. However, they are again circulated for a final verification check with the members prior to being published online. However, there are then cases where these Excel files need to be updated, which means that then the charts and tables in our factual presentation reports also need to be revised. And it leads to, as we call, a vicious cycle of email exchanges and meetings and dialogue between the members and the secretariat, having to update the data files and align all of the information in the correct format or version that is officially approved and verified by the member state. So as we see, the point of it is really that if we have just a little better collaboration in terms of having the more correct RTA data submission, we don't really have to go through all of this constant back and forth again and again, to having to recheck all of these charts and tables and verify with the members that the information in the reports at the committees are approved by the members. So we have with us our colleague from the integrated database, and here we really wanted to highlight that while in the IDB, it includes the regular annual notification of tariff and trade data based on the MFN rates and actual preferential rates at the current year. Every year, the data at the RTA section is specific to a specific notified RTA. And if the elements of required by an RTA are already in the IDB, then there is no need for a separate submission. However, what is a major challenge that we encounter is a lot of RTAs that we receive are actually negotiated and ratified perhaps many years in the past. And then the information that we actually request for these RTAs are then specific, for instance, to the HS nomenclature of those previous years, or have been negotiated in the HS nomenclature of those years of negotiation. Hence, the data in the IDB is not sometimes in the same nomenclature as what is reported for that specific RTA, and the secretariat then has to concord and correlate all of those tariff lines back to the same version, which is why we would like to actually encourage submissions for the RTAs to be either in the same nomenclature or to come with a corresponding national correlation table. So what are these ideal data submissions that we would like to receive? We start first with an example, just to be clearer. Here, so we have, for instance, country A as a party to submit the data for the following agreement. For instance, the agreement is United Kingdom, Eastern and Southern African States, and it is an agreement covering goods, which is entered into force on the 1st of January 2021 between the UK and the three countries from Eastern and Southern African States, which is implemented between the date of entry into force and the end of the implementation period, which is 2022 in this case. So for this agreement, what does country A then need to submit under Tradein Goods to the WTO Secretariat? So the data which needs to be submitted for the Secretariat to be able to build a corresponding report is MFN applied rates at the year of entry into force, which in this case is 2021. And then the corresponding preferential rates in this trade agreement, which is applied by the country to the partners between the years of implementation, which in this case is 2021 until 2022. And then the data for imports in the 3 years prior to entry into force, which in this case is 2018 to 2020. And then any accompanying tariff liberalization or methodology notes, if they are available and included in the agreement. So what is important to highlight here is the ideal format should be that all of the data submitted is in the same HS version, which is in this case HS 2017, because this is the HS nomenclature that is the nomenclature of the years of the trade negotiation. And so here we have the text document sample of an actual RTA data request, which, as we know, as you may know from receiving our requests, can be very lengthy and very complicated. So we will actually go through this in more detail by breaking down the elements of this. These Word documents come with an attached Excel file, which, for instance, for goods comes as a tariff schedule and imports data with the following columns. So we request, first of all, the tariff line at the national HS line level, including the MFN applied rate at the year of entry into force, the liberalization timeline, the preferential tariffs during the liberalization timeline, any accompanying remarks, which may be, for instance, additional classification of the goods being negotiated, or comments for tariff rate quotas or other important elements to the trade negotiation, and the value of imports for the 3 years prior to entry into force. And here we have provided instructions for each element that needs to be filled in. So here is the data file that is completely filled in. So you can see, for instance, that this is the file, the ideal file that is very well packaged and very easy to process already. You can see that the tariff lines are for every column are the same. And then they are all at the HS line level, and they are all in HS 2017. And the important thing that is in this file, if it were submitted like this, is that all of the data all of the tariff lines included are included from HS chapters 1 to 97. So even if there are lines that are not included in the agreement, or the tariffs have not been liberalized for the agreement, they still need to be submitted with the corresponding rates. And then all of the data needs to be at the national tariff line level. So it is in 8 digits or more. And all of the data should be, as mentioned, in the same HS version. Also, for the value of imports data, we do prefer that the data is submitted in millions of US dollars, because otherwise it needs to be converted to this currency from the local currency provided. So here we have an example of a tariff liberalization notes, where, for instance, it is specified that for country A, the following categories for imports from country B are required. For instance, so you have category B products that will be will have duties eliminated 5 years after entry into force. So these categories are very important for the Secretariat to be able to understand the background of the schedules provided and make adjustments as necessary. And here now is the template for services and FDI, which is also provided as an Excel file. And what is important here is that the data for services is provided using the balance of payments PPM6 classification of the IMF. And in this case, we take the 11 categories, subcategories that we include in our factual presentations for the 3 years prior to entry into force, both for global data and bilateral data. For foreign direct investment, we take data for FDI stock and FDI flow, also for the 3 years prior to entry into force, for both global data and also bilateral data. So finally, the data template for movement of natural persons is based on mode 4 of the movement of natural persons, and it includes, for instance, information on the number of persons and work permit and length of time that is exchanged between countries. However, it's important to highlight that movement of natural persons is usually data that is less available from countries. And along with bilateral data, you can see that, for instance, this submission was given to us and there is less information for those data elements. And it is a normal type of data submission that we receive. So we would prefer, in fact, if countries submit more just with global data and bilateral data, if it's available, rather than not submitting anything, which sometimes happens because they feel that there is no information available. And so here we have actually summarized most of these points into one file, which is RTA Data Submissions Cheat Sheet, which we are also circulating and we are uploading in the website. And some of these details my colleague Rowena will discuss in more detail, including this completeness check that we do at the end. So we hope that with this kind of tools and with these explanations, we have better laid out the data requirements for members for their submissions to the RTA section, and that it helps facilitate the submissions of the data requirements. And here, finally, is a sample of a national correlation table, which indeed we request from countries where we need to have the HS nomenclature moved to another one, for instance, for when they do not align between tariffs and imports. And this file is extremely important for us. If indeed it is requested, we really hope that you furnish it so that we can provide you with the economic report that is required for the factual presentations. So now I'll let my colleague Rowena talk about the common challenges.
Thank you, Pamela. Hello, everyone. I'm going to discuss with you the common challenges to data processing. As Pamela already discussed, the data that we require in order to create the tables and chart in the factual presentation. So ideally, we are requesting for the MFN upon entry into force, the preferential rates over the tariff liberalization, for example, 10 years, and the import data 3 years prior to entry into force of the agreement. So at first, we need to do the completeness checks. So we need to check if all the tariff lines are there from chapters 1 to 97. And in order to do this, we also need to check whether it is in the same HS version. Otherwise, there would be invalid codes, and then we would need to check with you if what are the correct tariff lines that should be there instead of the invalid codes. So in order to check this, we are using the WCO, the World Customs Organization concordance table at the 6-digit level. So we have different HS versions. HS92, usually the number of 6-digit unique lines is 5,018, HS1996, 5,113, all the way down to HS2017, which is 5,387. So if it's correct, then we will already at least have identified the correct version of the tariff line. We would say, oh yes, it is under the HS27 nomenclature. So all we need to do is check the other data elements, whether it has the same versions. So also under the completeness checks, we usually check whether MFN is greater or at least equal to the preferential rate. And there are cases where the MFN is less than the preferential, like the table shown below. You can see that under the MFN, under the 2017 nomenclature, the 2021 MFN is at 6% for the tariff line 0207110000. So for the preferential under 2021, it's at 6.7%. And then for 2022, it's at 6.1%. So these two clearly has preferential rates, which are higher than the MFN, which is the 6%. Sometimes these instances happen because the agreement was already, it was agreed under the old years, previous years. So for example, in the previous years, for example, the agreement was finalized in 2020. So the MFN at that year is, for example, 7%. And then for the base, maybe the base rate is also based on that year, the 2020 of 7%. And then the calculation of the preferential was based on a higher rate instead of the 6%. So for this case, in order for us, for the generation of the tables, sometimes we have a peculiar results. So we needed to adjust the preferential duties, whether it's equal or at least equal to the MFN or less than the MFN. So for the 2 years, 2021 and 2022, we adjust this to 6%. And then for the rest, we use the rates given to us. So here we have the country X submission. You can see that under the data request, for example, under this UK Central America agreement, we first check whether there are data in the IDB. So for the MFN 2021 for certain Central American countries, we check whether there's data in the IDB. If there's none, we ask for it. And also, we're also checking whether data for the preferential are available. In this case, because it's under the UK Central America, we check the previous agreement under the EU Central America. And then we ask the members if what they have committed on the concessions that they have under the EU is also the same as under the UK. If it's the same, they don't need to provide the information. So we'll just use the old preferential tariffs. And the third point is to see whether we have data 3 years prior to entry into force, the import data. So in this case, since the entry into force is 2021, we are looking whether there are data in the IDB. If there's data for 2018, 19, and 20, no need to provide the information. In this case, there's 2020 missing. So we are asking the parties to provide us the information. So here, the example is since it's under the UK Central America, and then we ask the question whether the agreement under the EU Central America also applies. So the party, of course, provided the data in this way. But the data that was provided to us is that it contains the MFN during the year of entry into force under the EU Central America, and not the MFN upon entry into force under the UK. So, of course, in this case, it's not relevant for us. So we won't use this MFN. And then we're going to check whether they have MFN 2021 in the IDB. And since this is from the old agreement, the HS version is also from the old version. So is in HS 2012 nomenclature. And in the old agreement, the liberalization period started from 2013 all the way to 2027. So now what is relevant for us is the year 2021 until 2027. So these are the only ones that we will need to qualify and process under the UK Central America Agreement. And then you can see that at least for this case, we have importation data, value of imports of this country, of country X from the UK. So they already provided it to us. The only problem is the HS version is different. It's actually in HS 2012. So if the MFN is in HS 2017, we will need to align it as well to 2017. So in this file, you can see that we already tried, since the absence of the HS concordance table at the tariff line level, we tried ourselves to align the file using the MFN in HS 2017 at the tariff line level. But the result is we still have many unmatched tariff lines. So we really need to encourage the members, if we ask for the concordance table at the tariff line level, to provide it to us. So there are certain cases where there are differences in the number of tariff lines. And why does this happen? So why does my factual presentation report show a different number of tariff lines? So usually, if for those people who are already familiar with the tables of the factual presentation, normally we have this first table that shows the number of tariff eliminated under the agreement with the corresponding average trade. And you can see here, the first line, it says MFN duty-free under 2021. So we already have 6,080 lines, which is equivalent to 94% already duty-free under the MFN and not even under the agreement. So it means that even prior to the agreement, the liberalization is already significant. It's 94%. And the value of imports under this regime, it already reached 90.4%. And under the agreement, further, there are 0.5%, which has been liberalized in 2021. And in 2022, there's 2.5%. And then you can see the remaining dutiable is 195 tariff lines, which is 3%. And then country A comment, my schedule says there should be 6,582 total lines. And then my schedule says in 2022, it should have 186 liberalized lines. So how come there are differences? Because for us, when we consolidate the file, and then, for example, as was previously shown to you, if the MFN is already lower, we adjust the preferential rate. So there are cases where MFN upon entry into force is already 0, then this is already counted under the MFN duty-free. So this case, for example, there's one line, MFN is already 0. And then for the preferential, the rate is at 6%. So the rate of 6% under the 2021, it's not counted anymore as dutiable line, but counted as duty-free under the MFN. So this is the reason why there are differences in the number of lines. And also there are cases where there are TLS and X-outs account for different total lines. We can see it in the next slide, the tariff line suffix TLS. The code used in WTO tariff database to extend a narrowly defined products, a tariff line HS code to record 2 or more duties at different levels. So actually we follow this under the, we follow the IDB processing, because if they have these instances, they put TLS, they put suffixes in order to distinguish one tariff line with different rates. So why are there different rates? For example, under the agreement, the 0805-1030, one part is excluded. So it has a 10% rate, which is actually equal to the MFN. And then another part, it's considered liberalized, it's 0%. For us, if we count it, it's not counted under the duty-free, but counted still under the remain dutiable. And we only count the average of this, the average of the 0805-1030, which is 5%. So 5%, it's counted as dutiable line instead of the 0%, which is the liberalized line. And then there are also cases where there are seasonal duties. So one tariff line sharing one rate, which is where the rate only applies for a specific season. So for this case, in 0708-2000, the TLS01 has 10% rate for the period July to September. And then the second suffix has 6.9% rate only for the period October to June. So in our case, again, we do the simple average, and then so we count this only as one tariff line instead of two. And the explanations of this, you can find it in the technical notes or factual presentations. So here, usually when we send out the factual presentation for the parties to do comments, we also issue a reference file where it contains explanations on how we process the data. So the data for the explanations for the TLS, explanations of seasonal duties, it's all there. So you can see it from the files that we send it to you, and also it's also posted in the RTA webpage. So the takeaways. Of course, we really encourage you to submit to us the ideal data in single file. So all of the tariff lines would be from 1 to 97 at the national level for the MFN of the year of entry into force, the preferential tariffs, and the import data 3 years prior to entry into force. So, but if the data is not available, you can send us whatever data you have so that we can verify. And then upon verification, we can do some meetings in order to clarify some questions from us. We're trying to present you this data dialogue in order for you to know the difficulties that we encounter so that we can try to eliminate it. So and also lessen the burden on your side to eliminate the usual back and forths. And we also would like to specify to point out that the data that we usually check from the IDB, if it's available, and then we don't need it anymore, it's the MFN upon entry into force and the import, the value of imports 3 years prior to entry into force of the agreement. But for the preferential tariff, there's a difference between RTA and IDB. So in the IDB, the preferential tariffs that are there are the current preferential tariffs. And the data in the RTA, it's the preferential tariffs over, it's actually the commitment under the agreement. So for example, if the agreement was ratified way back in 2010, for example, and then the liberalization is until, for example, 2021, and that tariff line has 5% in 2021, the preferential. But in the IDB, the MFN for 2021 is already 0%. Of course, in the IDB, it's already considered 0% and not 5%. So that's the difference between the preferential in the RTA and in the IDB. So you can, you can reach out to us, Pamela and Rowena. And here is again, the cheat sheet that was presented by Pamela previously. So again, to reiterate, we need an ideally single file, all the tariff line level 8 digits or more, and then same issues versions. If not, please submit the national correlation table in order for us to have an easier processing to align the differences in the versions of the MFN preferential and the import data. So in the RTA, what we need are the MFN upon the entry into force, the preferential duties. It's applied over the liberalization schedule starting from year of entry into force, and then it can be 10 years or more. And if there are information of base rates for tariff liberalization, you can also include that, and also the categories. So in case you have also information of that. And then the import statistics, the value of imports 3 years prior to entry into force. And then other data, we also require TRQs under the agreement, the tariff liberalization rules. So yeah, it's already mentioned before. Those are the categories. So that are those are the data for goods. And then for services, FDI, and movement of natural persons, usually we have actually difficulties in getting this data from the parties. So if we don't get data from them, we normally use data elsewhere. Like for example, the commercial services, we get it from the WTO database, but usually it's global, but there are few members that have a bilateral data. And then for FDIs, we usually use the data from UNCTAD, and movement of natural persons, if there's none, it's okay. So for the bonus completeness check, again, what we do is we check the completeness of the tariff lines. For example, chapters 1 to 97. If the country only submits, for example, few lines, they would need to tell us what are the status of the other lines. For example, you only submitted only those tariff lines that has reduced rates or excluded lines. So you need to tell us that the rest of the tariff lines should be already duty-free under the agreement. And then if we have the complete data set, for example, from the IDB, we don't need to ask the missing information from you. But if none, then of course we would still ask what are the missing tariff lines, MFN duties. And then of course the preferential rates should have a decreasing rates over time. If not, then we would have difficulty in presenting it in a, we would have some questionable results in the calculation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rowena. So I think now we can move to the third session, or well, we have one slide left, but it's okay. Before we start with the interactive dialogue, if you have comments or questions. And I give the floor to Adelina for her presentation.
Thank you, Pamela, and welcome to all of you. Belated welcome. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening. As part of these data dialogues, we just thought that it would be also good for the IDB unit to present what we have in terms of, and what we require from you in terms of notification. And if you can present or give to us a comprehensive and automated data notification for the IDB, we think that it would reduce a lot your notification burden. So let me show you this comic slide that instead of arguing, we just use data. So it's the best way to resolve any argument. So let me present first the IDB. The IDB is probably one of the oldest, if not the oldest database here at the WTO. In fact, it predates the WTO because it was launched during the GATT years to facilitate negotiations during the Uruguay round. It was adopted by the WTO General Council decision, and it's the official database of the organization, which contains yearly applied tariffs and imports. Its operations are overseen by the Committee on Market Access, and other WTO committees have piggybacked relevant data requirement to the IDB. We need your notifications on applied tariffs on or before 30 March of the current year. So by this time, you should have notified to the IDB already your applied tariffs. On imports, the deadline should be, or the deadline is, before the 31st of October of the following year. So that means 2021 imports should be notified by 31 October 2022. So that gives the country 10 months after the end of the calendar year to prepare their imports data for notification to the IDB. And the status of IDB notifications is circulated as an official WTO document. The obligatory data for all members are the MFN applied tariffs at the national tariff line level, or what they call 8-digit level, and imports bilateral corresponding to each of the tariff line code or each product code. Again, the applied tariffs MFN schedule should be consistent or should match the tariff line schedule used for imports. So every member should notify that. Now, those members who are part of the WTO preferential trading arrangement, or the PTA transparency mechanism, there are some obligatory data from them. And the obligatory data are these ones: the preferential applied tariffs and import statistics for preferences by developed countries to developing and least developed countries in accordance with the GSP, including the list of countries or customs territories on which they apply. So this is obligatory for members of the PTA transparency mechanism. And these are non-reciprocal. So developing countries need not give preference to imports from developed countries. And in the second bullet, it says preferential applied tariffs and import statistics in case of preferential treatment accorded by any member to products of least developed countries. So this is now from developing countries or any other member to their preferences granted to LDCs. And again, even though the UN has its own list of LDCs, since this is non-reciprocal, then the preference-giving country can choose the countries or the partners for which they give preference. And that is why we need the list of countries which are granted preference by the preference-giving country. And any other non-reciprocal preferential arrangements authorized under the WTO agreement, including the list of countries or again of territories on which they apply. So that's obligatory data from some members. The optional data to the IDB are the data which are applied in the context of regional trade agreements, which is actually our topic for this afternoon. So preferential tariffs and the list of countries or territories covered by each of these agreements. In fact, in Annex, the first paragraph of the Annex of the RTA TM document, it says, RTA parties shall not be expected to make available the information required below in the text if the corresponding data has already been submitted to the IDB. Other optional data are other applied non-MFN tariffs. For example, tariffs applied on imports originating from non-WTO members. Other optional data are preferential import statistics under other trade agreements. For example, FTAs or customs unions, disaggregated by country of origin, by tariff line, and by tariff line we mean the national tariff line code used by the country, and by the duty regime under which each product was imported. And this is very important, the highlighted part. The statistics should distinguish at the tariff line level, and for each of the beneficiary partners, the imports entered under MFN conditions from the imports entered under preferential conditions. So while this is optional data, this is very important and crucial for us to analyze the data of preference utilization. Other optional data that we need, if possible, are the ad valorem equivalents of non-ad valorem duties as calculated by the member. For example, if your rate is $3 per kilogram, what is the ad valorem equivalent of that? And we need the ad valorem equivalents to calculate aggregate statistics. For example, average tariff. So those are included in the calculations of our aggregate statistics. We also need from you, if possible, applied internal taxes and other duties and charges when these are applied at the tariff line level. Other optional data are imports or proportion of imports under tariff rate quotas for each identified tariff line associated with a relevant TRQ. And this is especially important when the in quota and out of quota imports are recorded under the same tariff line code. So this is actually the IDB cycle of data notification. At least twice a year, we send out an email to the Geneva mission and to the capital if we have already the email address of people in the capital of our contact persons to remind them to submit either the imports or the tariff. So around January, we send out a call to notify for tariffs. And around August or September, we send out another email, the call to notify, this time for imports. Usually, the Geneva mission forwards this email to the capital, and then capital officials prepare the notification and send the file either directly to the IDB or through the Geneva mission. And then once we receive the file, we do initial verification. If there are questions to the data, we send out a clarification email to the capital again, or CC the Geneva mission, whichever contact person we have. So it could be the Geneva mission who will then forward again the data to the email, the questions to the capital. So this cycle goes on until the data is okay, and then it gets logged or noted or registered in the IDB Information Management System, or what we call the IDB IMS. We send now an official acknowledgement letter to the Geneva mission again, CC the capital, that the data status is okay, and then we start processing the data. However, sometimes additional problems crop up during the processing itself, which were not initially apparent when we got the data the first time. And then the cycle goes on and on until we finally resolve all the problems. The data are integrated, and then these are published. Once the data are integrated, we send out a letter to the capital and the Geneva mission telling them to look at the data, which are now in what we call the provisional status. After 30 days, without any problems or without any comment from the member, the data gets published or disseminated publicly. And depending on the agreement of the country, the whole data set could be available to the public, could be made available to the public, or it could be only the tariffs that are readily that are made available and imports at the 6-digit level. Because some countries restrict tariff line imports only to authorized users. And authorized users need a user ID and password to be able to access this sensitive information. How do countries notify? What are their options? Let me start first with the second bullet. It could be the regular email. It could be a regular attachment to an email which is sent to the IDB mailbox or to me or to whoever is in the IDB unit. You can also upload it on the IDB file exchange facility, which is a SharePoint server. So each country has a user ID and password. When they log into the IDB file exchange facility, they will be directed to their own country's directory. And there they can upload the file. Once a file is uploaded to this facility, the system sends an email to the IDB telling us that a new file has been uploaded to whichever directory. So it could be the US directory. Then that means new data came from the United States or whichever country. Or it could also be from other electronic storage media. Some countries give the data to us in a flash drive. And the most recent and the most effective and with the least notification burden on your part is the automatic data notification. This is provided for on paragraph 8 of the new IDB decision under G/MA/367, under which a country can enter into an agreement with the WTO for the IDB to source the data directly from an electronic system managed by the capital. So if you have data published in your website, we can directly link to the database behind that website. And we can extract the data from there. You can also just tell us that these are the data that you will allow. It could be limited depending on your situation, depending on which ones you are comfortable sharing at the moment. Which are the suggested data formats? Of course, spreadsheet. It could be Excel, CSV, or whatever spreadsheet you are using. We also accept text delimited data or data in an actual database format. For example, Access or SQL. But please do not send us a PDF. file. Because some countries, we know that the MFN is actually based on your legal document. And sometimes they give us a copy of, the book itself. But unfortunately for us, it's very, very difficult and very prone to errors to convert a PDF to a tabular format. There are many misalignments and everything. So it's very prone to error. And the new IDB decision specifically discourages members from notifying PDFs. Currently, the database contains around 3,000 report-per-year data sets, which are publicly available. And every year, the IDB expects 136 notifications from 164 members. So this is actually twice a year. 4 tariffs once during the first quarter, and then 4 imports of the previous year during the last quarter. Because the EU 27, they report as one, and Switzerland and Liechtenstein, they report as one. And the earliest data that we have in the IDB are for 1996. So this is the sample template for obligatory data. So you can see in the format, we need the tariff line code, and the tariff line code should be in the actual number of digits that you use in your customs bureau. The first 6 digits should follow the standard HS subheading codes. And they should be all in one specific HS version only. The next column refers to the suffix. So this is the case when you have the same product, but you have 2 different rates. In this case, the second rate refers to the rate for in-quota imports. You can immediately see it in the last column of the table where there is an in-quota indicator. And then in this case, we only have the MFN rates. So the rate could be like in this example, $119 per 100 kilogram, which is a specific duty. And then the others are ad valorem. So this is a sample template for obligatory data, which means every member should have at least this information in their notification. And then we also need some explanation to the data that you sent us. So in this case, you need to tell us that these are your applied tariffs for 2022. And it is already in HS 2022 version. Only the MFN is provided. And for non-ad valorem duties, the currency unit is the US dollar. And duty is assessed based on gross weight. So those are some of the additional info that we need to be able to process or integrate the data correctly. In this slide is a template for obligatory data for imports. So again, you have the tariff line code on the first column. You have a suffix in case there are suffixes. The next column refers to the partner where you imported the goods from. In this case, the partner column contains already the national codes by the country, the value, and the quantity. So those are required in the IDB. And then the quantity, you have to give us what exactly is the unit of measure you use. Other optional data could be an alternative quantity to the same value, import value that you use. In this case, the data for the second tariff line sample 29054500, which are provided in tons, are also provided in kiloliter. So the imports from Australia, which is 100, well, we will see the quantity, the value and the currency later. 200 tons refer to 176 kiloliter. So basically, quantity 1 and quantity 2, they are equivalent. Now, these are the additional info that we need to properly interpret the data on imports. So the data that we received from you in that sample was for 2021, but it is in HS 2017. The system of trade is general, and the currency used for the value is in national currency. So it could be in national currency or it could be already in US dollar. But everything in our database is converted to US dollars as far as imports are concerned. So that is our standard currency. Then the customs value is determined on a CIF basis. And if you provided data to us in national currency, we need the exchange rate, the average exchange rate for the year. If you do not provide it to us, we will get the exchange rate from the IMF, International Financial Statistics. In the example given below, the duty regime provided was only for MFN. The unit of the value of data is already in thousands. We saw country codes in the file, so the country has to provide to us the official correlation table between their country codes and the official country names. And if there are other quantity codes, if these are used, then they need to provide to us as well. This one is an example when the tariff includes some optional data, and in this case, required data for PTA-TM members. So it's the same tariff line code, suffixes, product description, but in addition to the MFN, we have 4 more duty regimes. The GSP and the LGC, which are required from members of the PTA-TM, and 2 optional duty regimes, which are not required, but were provided by the country. In this case, these are free trade agreements, 2 free trade agreements, so FTA 1 and 2. Additionally, the country also provided the AVE, the ad valorem equivalent of the non-ad valorem duty, which we saw in here. So according to the country who notified, $119 per 100 kilogram net is equivalent to 30%. And then ODC, other duties and charges, and the same in quota indicator, which we saw earlier. We need also the additional information of all the columns that were provided in the notification. So in this case, the additional info that we need is who are the beneficiaries of the preferential schemes. And in this case, it's provided in the file Preferential Partners 2022.xlsx. So this is an additional file which we would need so that we can properly integrate the data on tariffs, the preferential data specifically. This is a sample template of imports with optional data. So you can see in here, because Australia is a party to the FTA, imports from Australia can come under either the MFN or the FTA. The same thing with Sri Lanka. In addition, however, to the MFN and the FTA with Sri Lanka as a developing country is also entitled to the GSP. And in this case, it is given the GSP treatment by the importing country, by the country who gave this notification. So you can see in here, Australia has MFN or FTA1, Sri Lanka has GSP or the FTA2, and other countries like Brazil, China, they are only entitled to the MFN. And one LDC country, Mali, is given the LDC preferential rate. So these are the additional information that we need. We need the duty regimes and the preferential partners provided in the tariffs. We need country codes and we need quantity codes in case these are given to us in codes. If these are given to us as like the full description of the country, full country name or full quantity description, then we don't need this additional information from the country. So these are example of the quantity codes, country codes, and beneficiaries for each non-MFN duty regime. Again, once similar to what Rowena mentioned in terms of verification, we need to have the complete tariff nomenclature. So chapters 1 to 97 and all the subheadings should be present based on a specific HS version. Preferential duty should be lower than MFN. So it cannot be equal. If it's equal, then it reverts back to just being the MFN. However, LDC duties should be lower, could be lower or equal to GSP. So LDC duties, which are equal to the GSP, we assume that the rules of origin are less stringent. That's why we allow that LDC imports can be equal to, in terms of rate, to the GSP rate. Imports should match the tariff line nomenclature. So they should match 100%. And for us, the basic data for integration is the applied tariff nomenclature. So what we do when they are not perfectly aligned is to match the imports to the tariff line, applied tariff line codes, which were usually submitted ahead. So once again, it's the basic data for integration are the applied tariffs. And bilateral preferential imports are matched by tariff line and beneficiary list. So only beneficiaries of a duty regime are allowed as partners for imports data for the specific duty regime, and only preferential tariff lines can have the breakdowns into MFN and or other eligible tariff scheme for benefiting partners. This is just a sample inventory of the IDB data for which there's a breakdown of preferential imports. So those countries or WTO members which are highlighted This means that they provide data to us, the optional data, even though they are not part of the PTA transparency mechanism. When you have comprehensive data, then you can do comprehensive analysis. And in this case, we were able to do bilateral preferential utilization in each other's markets because EFTA, composed of Iceland, Norway, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein, provide data to us by duty regime. So we were able to calculate preference utilization of, in this case, it's the EU, in the EU market. So EFTA preference in EU markets. And this is now EU preference in EFTA markets. So without comprehensive data given by the EU and the 3 or 4 EFTA members, we would not be able to give this very detailed analysis. So in terms of comparable bilateral relationships, these are easier to assess when you have the data as provided by these members to the IDB. In fact, we even have very, very detailed information, comparable statistics, because the data are available in our database. By the way, we only have imports data, okay, such that exports are treated as bilateral, what the country exports. So EU's exports to EFTA are actually EFTA's imports from the EU and vice versa. So whereas we say these are exports, these are actually mirror imports. These are mirror statistics. So we have so many requests, data, IDB, RTA, PTA, everything. But we just want comprehensive notification to the IDB, at least those that can be used by the other agreements, those required by the other the preferential or by the other committees, can be directly sourced from the IDB. And one of the best ways that you can provide this is through the automatic data notification, where all the data that we need can be easily accessed from your own server. The data can be notified to us more in a more ahead of even the deadlines, or not in a very timely manner. And it can be customized according to your own situation, like I mentioned earlier. If you're not comfortable sharing tariff imports yet, we could start with just tariffs. If you don't want us pulling data from your database, you can push it to us. You can send it to us. What we need is just an agreement from you that this you want to enter into this agreement with us. And before we enter into the agreement, we already make some sort of initial study on what we can get from you without having without you doing anything more than your current status. Okay, so it will not be anything more than what you're doing at the moment. So instead of this whole thing in yellow, it will be just a much simpler process. And as I mentioned in here, all data issues will be sorted out during the testing. And every time we get data from you, you will still be notified that data are extracted from your database and are about to be processed or integrated into the IDB. So the processing and dissemination part would not be changed at all. Only your part. We intend to make it much easier for you. Currently, there are 4 countries, Canada, Uruguay, Mauritius, and Norway, and 3 Asikuda users, Madagascar, Cote d'Ivoire, and Togo, who have entered into an automatic data notification agreement with the IDB. And you can see in here, in the slide, the agreements are different from country to country, so it can be customized. Whatever it is that you feel comfortable sharing, that is what we will take from you. And you don't need to do anything more than what you're doing right now. What are the problems we have with IDB preferential data? First, we have very limited coverage. Members of the PTA-TM are only 24, and not all of them are notifying the required data. There is a lack of incentive among members to notify optional data, and the Secretariat lacks the enforcement capability. Notifications often come late. So as of yesterday, more than 43% of expected 2020 imports and 60% of 2021 imports are still not received. So in terms of 2020 imports, those were due for already more than a year. And this is very common for data sets that come sometimes from different agencies. There are inconsistencies sometimes between the tariffs, the codes used for the applied tariff notification, and those used for imports data. So we encourage members to submit comprehensive optional data to the IDB, as well as encourage other members to do the same, especially with their FTA, RTA partners. The automatic data notification is a very efficient way to lessen the notification burden in capitals. And if you are a user of Asikuda World in your system, then we can offer technical assistance for you to have this automatic data notification agreement with the WTO. Our data are disseminated in these portals. We have the World Tariff Profiles, we have the data portal, we have the tariff analysis online, and this third one, the tariff analysis online, this is where you will get the preferential imports data, especially for the GSP and LDC preferential scheme. So that is available from the tariff analysis online and the statistics portal. By the way, the World Tariff Profiles 2022 is already out, and it's a very useful source of data on tariffs. And that's about it. Thank you. And your questions and comments are most welcome. You can ask them now in their chat, or raise your hand, or you can send them to the IDB mailbox or to my personal email address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adelina. And indeed, we are really privileged today to partake of your many years of wisdom and expertise in this organization. I really personally learned a lot from this session. And so let's open the floor for any comments or questions. And in the meantime, I think you may remember this question from the morning, but we need it for recording purposes. So it's really interesting, this automated data notification system. Is it an ongoing initiative or a new initiative?
Well, it's part of what's provided for in the new IDB decision. We still call it new IDB decision, but it was approved by the Committee on Market Access in 2019. But remember, this IDB thing, it's I mentioned earlier, it was the IDB was already created or launched ahead of the WTO. It was used during the it was used, data in the IDB was used during the negotiations for the Uruguay round. But then, of course, we are in the modern world now, and we need to have a more dynamic, more automated, more modern way to collect data. And that is the automatic data notification initiative included in the new IDB decision, which allows the WTO to explore the possibility with members to get data from their own from their own tariff databases. So I think most countries now, most capitals have a tariff database or imports database. So it's just a matter of us being given the, being given the chance to collect data, or for them to allow us to get data from whatever it is that they feel comfortable sharing with us. For example, in the case of Canada, I mentioned this morning, the data that they have on tariffs, they are available from their website for the public to use. So we're just web scraping the data from their website and then automating the processing afterwards. But currently, for Canada, the imports are still not pushed automatically to us. It's still just tariffs, but we can start with tariffs. In the case of Mauritius, everything is already pushed to us, tariffs and imports. And in the case of Mauritius, even their ODCs are notified, and imports by breakdown by duty scheme. So we really have very good data from Mauritius. We are talking with many other members. We had talks with Singapore, with Mexico, with Honduras, the UK. We will, I think tomorrow, we will explore the possibility with them. We're talking with the EU. We're talking with many members to try to get them on board this automatic data notification.
Thanks so much. And that's really very interesting as an initiative for statistics teams to be doing now. The other question that also from me is, when you do actually analysis using your data, is it something that is originating in the team, or is it done with the members? Is it a request from them when they do their negotiations, or?
Well, it's both. Sometimes for specific studies, we use our own data. For example, this preferential utilization of EFTA vis-a-vis the EU, these were done because the EFTA asked us to participate in their workshop specifically on preferential utilization. So we used the IDB data, which by the way came from them and the EU, and did some analysis and presented it to them. In the same way, for example, we sometimes, for example, the preference utilization of GSP and LDC, these are mandated by members, and these are presented to the Rules of Origin Committee. We also published some of these results in the special topic of the World Tariff Profiles. So these are either, I mean, the interest and the request sometimes comes from members, sometimes it's our own initiative.
Yeah, actually, this is another question for me, but so all of these other some other UN agencies are using a lot more this data visualization software. And I think also ERST is starting a little bit to use these Tableau tables and these things.
Yeah, in the IDB data and data from our other group on trade in goods. We have what we call the statistics dashboard. I think it's part of the of the trade dissemination. Yeah, this one, the statistics portal. We call it statistics portal, which is actually a dashboard, and it includes visualization. That one. Yeah, the last one. It includes visualization of some of the market access indicators like applied tariffs and tariffs by binding coverage, bound tariffs. A lot of these are indicators coming from the world tariff profiles. So these are the ones that are, I mean, we offer some visualization of the data from in this statistics dashboard, and this uses Tableau. Yeah.
Is it already directly linked to your database?
Yes and no, because the data are actually calculated from the database. So the data are calculated, so these are not actually raw data. These are calculated indicators already. The data that links directly from the database are published in the tariff analysis online.
Okay, that's very good to know. So sorry, these are just side questions. Thank you so much, Adelina, and my very good colleague Rowena for sharing also your very fantastic expertise with us. And just to, I guess, to remind everyone that all of the presentations and recordings of the sessions will be posted on the RTA webpage, as well as the portal for the tariff notifications to the IDB. And we will also circulate the materials to the registered email addresses of participants to these sessions. And you can always reach out to us if you would like to have another session on a topic that is very dear to you, or you would like some more kind of a data dialogue such as this on related topics, or just your own very, you know, your special topic to your heart that links to RTAs or MFN tariffs, because this is our favorite things in the world, right? And with that, Rohini had to leave us for another meeting, but I would like Adelina to give us her concluding remarks, if she has.
So thank you everyone for your participation. We hope that through this data dialogue, we were able to clarify some of the issues that you find difficult when notifying data to us, either to the RTA or to the IDB. And we also hope that we were able to offer you some options that could be used to lessen the notification burden on your part. As mentioned by my colleagues Rowena and Pamela, don't hesitate to reach out to us in case you think we could be of any help to you. And once again, we thank you for your for your cooperation and for your interest in these topics. Have a good day. Bonne continuation, as they say in French.